Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma. Joining me is Professor Harsh Pant. On this episode of the Ideas Factory, we would be looking at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Europe visit. How important was it? What did India achieve? And the timing of the visit. Very warm welcome to you, Harsh. I would like to begin by asking you the significance of this 3 day tour to the three European nations that the Prime Minister undertook. He's now back from this trip, and the kind of engagement that we've seen between India and Europe in the past few weeks has been very encouraging. There has been a lot of high level visits from European leaders to India as well. And now the prime minister has just completed his trip, which has been quite successful. So I would like to understand what's the difference in India's engagement with the West this time, and this change is happening at a time when Europe is in the middle of a crisis in terms of Russia-Ukraine war. There is a war in the heart of Europe. At the same time, the prime minister visits three European nations. How significant is that? And what's different in the engagement this time?
Thanks, Naghma. I think the fact that this visit happened at this particular point in time, where Prime Minister was in three key countries of Europe and was able to articulate India's position so categorically, is in and of itself, I think, an achievement or a big deal because clearly diplomats, political leaders don't undertake foreign visits if the differences on certain issues are quite palpable. And this is a moment when we know that India and the European Union, India and Europe diverge on Ukraine. There are challenges in the way we are addressing this question, and there are bilateral differences of opinion, and the two countries are trying to work their way around those differences. So the fact that Prime Minister was able to articulate those differences in these countries is in itself something that I think underscores the changing realities of global politics and the changing tone of India-Europe relations. India-EU relations, despite all the talk of liberal values of democratic societies, had always been underwhelming. We partly because European Union openly articulated that it does not want to do geopolitics, it does not want to do balance of power politics, and its self identity as a normative power meant that there was always more focus, ironically, on India's developmental democratic challenges than on the opportunities that a country like India provides to European Union. And so, again, in an ironic twist, India and
Yeah.
China, sorry, Europe and China had a much more robust relationship than India and European Union. And I think now that things are changing, now that things are evolving, now that there is a balance of power, shift in global politics, there is an Indo-Pacific new reality evolving in the Indo-Pacific. It's the center of gravity of global politics is in the Indo-Pacific. I think India and European Union both are trying to work out a new arrangement. They are both trying to work out a new engagement. And that means that for both the countries, there is a new strategic reality that has to be accommodated, that has to be engaged with. And therefore, the tone of the conversation has changed, where the idea is that despite our differences on Ukraine, we will continue to look at the big picture, we will continue to look at the strategic picture, and we will continue to work towards it.
Sure. So, what has caused the shift in these outreach by the West? We've seen there has been an outreach by the West. Is it the increasing realization how how important the Indo-Pacific is, or the center of power is? Strategically shifting towards the Indo-Pacific, and India's important role here in India's strategic significance in this area. And you were mentioning China and the rise of China and how Europe and China were coming together, but then there is an increasing realization of the threat that is emanating from China in terms of trade and on other aspects. So, what are the different causes that is actually causing this shift in the approach?
I think that there are two things. One is certainly the the changing nature of global politics. where Indo-Pacific is the center of gravity of global politics and economics. And in the Indo-Pacific, Indo-Pacific won't be Indo-Pacific without India. So India is at the heart of this debate. India is at the heart of this discussion, and therefore Europe wants to engage with India. Partly also because of the wider disillusionment that has set in because of China. There was a time when there was a lot of optimism about China. There was a lot of optimism about China becoming more like the West. But today, that has been set aside. China is posing challenges of the kind that I think very few in the Western world anticipated, and those challenges are making the West, in particular European Union, aware of the kind of the shift that is happening in global politics. And if European Union is not to lose its relevance, it has to play a certain kind of a role in the evolving balance of power. So I think gone are the days of saying that we don't do geopolitics or we don't do balance of power politics. Europe is increasingly involved in the evolving balance of power debate, evolving balance of power engagements, and I think that is something that is shifting the narrative in Europe. The other, of course, is that Europe itself is trying to figure out its own new identity at a time when great power politics is at its doorstep. When it is not simply about China rising in the Indo-Pacific, it is Russia challenging European Union, Russia challenging Europe on its very doorsteps. So I think once again you have a situation where that self-created identity of a normative power is not enough to push back against these vulnerabilities that have been created by Russia on the one hand and China on the other. And therefore, for European Union, it's a moment to come out of its shell. It's a moment to declare its ambitions much more openly, and it's a moment to revise its force posture. And I think one of the most remarkable transformations has been in Germany, a country that had
Sure.
post Second World War was trying to constrain itself as a strategic actor, today is revising its national security doctrines, revising its foreign policy posture, which is going to have remarkable long-term effects on global politics. But that's where we are at this. This is a particularly important moment in the evolution of European Union with what is happening in Russia, with Russia, and what is happening with China, and what is happening in the Indo-Pacific. So I think if you combine these factors, you see a long-term shift in European Union's position, its posture, and in growing relevance of India in that posture. That if you have to look at things strategically, if you have to look out at the trends over the long term, then India is going to play a pivotal role. India is going to be an important factor in the evolution of the structural realities, and of course, the way India has played its cards, the way India has been able to articulate the role of a nation that is a responsible global stakeholder, that is not out there to disrupt the system, that is there to manage that disruption in the best way possible and contribute to the balance of power, to the emerging global governance architecture. I think all that has made it very clear to European Union that India is going to be an important partner. And of course, India also has made its intent very clear that unlike in the past, where there used to be certain defensiveness in engaging the West, today India is very pragmatic, and India is looking out for its interests. And the West is an important part of India's developmental story. Without West, India would face enormous challenges, and therefore engagement with the West, engagement with the Europe, but on its own terms. And I think
Yes.
that's why we are seeing a changing narrative, a change in foreign policy discourse in India, which is
Yeah.
contributing to
Yes.
India-Europe relations.
Yes, definitely a more confident approach, and India is engaging with the world on its own terms, and India is firm on its stand, whether it is about the European crisis, I mean the Russia-Ukraine crisis, or on many other issues. So there is a more self-confident India, which is not trying to please anyone in the world, but also looking at its own interests. This trip that the Prime Minister undertook, the three-nation trip, it has been a diplomatic success. The timing was very important, very significant. Also, it was at a time when the last country he visited, France. President Macron's re-election, and after that, this was his first engagement with Prime Minister Modi again. So that itself is very significant. There is also the India Nordic Summit, Harsh, that took place, and that's very significant too. Not many people here in India, especially, know the importance of the Nordic countries and the kind of economy that these Nordic nations are, and they are quite sizable, and the engagement. So there have been many tangible and intangible successes that this European trip has yielded. So, would you like to actually point out the significance of the Nordic Summit and what did we really achieve in terms of what was the focus of this trip in terms of any tangible gain?
Yes, I think in all three countries, if you look at Germany, Denmark, and along with the Nordic countries, the Council, as well as France, you have some very interesting agendas that were being played out. France and Germany, of course, are leaders in European Union, and they did drive European Union agenda. France and Germany were the first two countries, along with Netherlands, that came out with the Indo-Pacific policy before European Union came out with its Indo-Pacific policy. So there is clearly, the engagement with France and Germany also has to be looked at in its own terms. And in both countries, there are new governments. Of course, Emmanuel Macron has just been elected, but even Mr. Scholz, the Chancellor in Germany, is new, and this was his first official engagement with India. India's India German Intergovernmental Council was the this was the this was the first intergovernmental council meeting that Germany was having with any foreign country after the coming to office of Chancellor Scholz. So there is certainly a right moment for India to make its presence in these two countries. With Germany, we have seen a partnership which is evolving, in a manner that is quite interesting, because Germany, of course, is as I was suggesting, is also changing track, is also trying to emerge as a strategic player. But if with India the focus has been on green and sustainable partnership initiative that we have signed with Germany. We have signed mobility agreement with Germany, professional mobility agreement, which is going to be very, very important. Germany is a country where there are facing demographic challenges. They need professionals in services sector, and India is clearly one country where they will be looking for. So I think as the priorities of Germany evolve, as Germany looks out for partners, India, with its ability to serve some of these key industries, is going to be an important partner, and Germany will be an important partner when you look at India trying to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels. So the kind of sustainable energy partnership, hydrogen partnership that India is creating with Germany is going to play a very important role. And let's also not forget that one of the lessons that Europe and Germany in particular is also learning from this crisis is not to have an over reliance on any one particular country on energy, the kind they have on Russia. India is also a country that is also learning that you still don't want to have a reliance on one particular country like Russia on defense. So I think there are similarities in their overviews which I think converge very nicely. So we are looking at this partnership that has great potential in going forward, and Germany remains the economic powerhouse in Europe. With
Yeah.
Nordic countries, even Denmark, of course, we have seen great degree of bilateral traffic back and forth at the highest levels in the last few years. And Denmark has been a key partner in innovation and climate change setup for us. So by expanding it, and this has been, I think, one of the new institutional mechanisms that India has created, of having these regional conclaves, whether it is in Central Asia, whether it is in Nordic countries, whether it is Eastern European countries. So there is an attempt to embed bilateral relationships in larger regional frameworks, which allows India to leverage partnerships not simply with that particular country, but also with a larger group of countries, and in this case, Nordic Council. Nordic countries are extremely important if you are thinking of the future of technology, if you are thinking of future of workforce, if you are thinking of how the climate debate, energy debate is transforming itself, research and innovation, and they are key centers. So I think having a strong partnership with them and a regular partnership, this was the second Nordic Council meeting that India was undertaking, is a very important move to make sure that India has a footprint in most parts of the world. Sometimes when you have bilateral visits, you miss out on other regional countries. But this is an important institutional mechanism which allows you to tap into other regional players as well. And I think India has done well in terms of tapping into the larger Nordic ecosystem. And of course, France has been a traditional partner. France is a long-standing partner, one of our most important partners, supportive of India on all global fora, especially in the UN Security Council. France has been steadfast with India. So I think this was with France. I think the meeting was largely on a personal level. If you think of Prime Minister Modi's personal relationships, I think apart from Shinzo Abe, Emmanuel Macron is the one leader that he shares a very, very close relationship with. So I think this was also about just congratulating him on his visit, and also to make it very clear that France remains a very important partner for India as the two countries move forward. Both countries have a similar foreign policy vision, which emphasizes strategic autonomy, which does not want to do things under duress, and which emphasizes the role of strategic independence, and that space that a country needs to make its own judgments about its strategic choices. So I think with France, the relationship, which is already very strong with hardly any differences, the idea was to once again emphasize the continuity of this relationship. And let me also add that France perhaps is the only country that in Europe that is continuing to have regular dialogue with the Russian president. Just
Yeah.
a few days back, Emmanuel Macron did call up Vladimir Putin. So I think there are very few leaders apart from Macron and Mr. Modi who can call Mr. Putin at this juncture. And I think this would have been another moment for the two leaders to figure out, what is going to be the future direction of Ukraine, of Russia, and of Europe as this war continues to go into a stalemate, and as the stakes continue to rise for Europe.
Of course, in these meetings, Ukraine has come up as a big agenda that they talked about. And lastly, Harsh, I mean, of course, it's very significant, but since we've been talking about Europe, but let's look at our neighbors, and there's a big crisis brewing here in Sri Lanka, and that's the cause of worry for India. This huge economic crisis that Sri Lanka is facing, of course, has now led to a state of emergency, and it gives sweeping powers to the security forces there to curb the protests. The president has resorted to this. It has also affected, the other neighboring countries like Nepal and Pakistan, and there has been, the forex has fallen. So all that is also a cause of worry for India. The situation in Sri Lanka is really volatile right now.
Yeah, very, very, very serious situation. And I think an economic crisis that was mismanaged has now resulted in a political crisis, a crisis of confidence in a nation that was just a few years back doing so well. So I think here is a cautionary tale for countries that that you need constant monitoring of your economic agenda, because clearly uh, you know if you don't address structural problems, as Sri Lankans were not able to do, you really end up in a very serious crisis. And not to acknowledge and take remedial actions at the right time leads to this challenge. And also, I think for political leaders, this is a cautionary tale of how you really cannot turn away from from making difficult choices at critical junctures. But Sri Lanka is clearly a difficult situation for India, for the region, and as you are mentioning, we are seeing a cascading effect. We are seeing countries like Nepal and Pakistan facing enormous problems, and both of these countries, in fact all three countries, are also facing political challenges because of this. So this is a situation where India finds itself in, where you have neighbors facing enormous economic stress, and the likelihood that this economic challenge will transform itself into a political challenge, which ultimately India will have to figure out a response to. Now, India has done well in Sri Lanka by offering some solid help, and trying to make it very clear that it stands by Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan people, and would want to ensure that everything is done to make sure that Sri Lanka is able to wade through the crisis. But I think what is important here is also to underline that for many Sri Lankan leaders, political leaders, there should also be a moment to reflect on the kind of strategic choices that they are making. it can't be a situation that you keep on making bad or suboptimal choices, and then as a neighbor India has to come in and and help you out, because that also creates its own set of costs for India and for the region. So I think this is also a cautionary tale for politicians across the region, for political leaders across the region, to be very sagacious as they try to make strategic choices, where they are getting their money from, where they are getting aid from, what kind of aid that is, how that aid is used within the country, and what kind of costs are associated with that aid. Sometimes they are invisible costs which are not visible at the moment, but they can have long-term deleterious consequences. So I think an important moment, both in the evolution of not only Sri Lanka's economic wisdom, but also perhaps India's and the regions.
Sure. It definitely, like you said, is a cautionary tale for India and countries around to make a sagacious choice as far as getting these countries out of their economic crisis or the political turmoil is concerned. So, all around India, the neighbors right now, in fact, there is political turmoil, there is economic emergency, and India is carefully watching these. Thank you so much for that analysis, Harshan. That's all from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory, and we will join you very soon on another episode in probably 15 days' time from now. Thank you so much for watching.